They say somewhere beneath the green slopes of Lower Silesia, deep under the polished earth, a train still sleeps. Not a passenger train, not a supply train, but a ghost. A 100-meter steel serpent, sealed in darkness since the final spring of 1945. Its wagons heavy with gold bars, diamonds, art stolen from across a dying Europe. Some locals claim they can still hear its echo on quiet nights, the faint rattle of carriages buried in rock. Others swear it never existed at all, but for those of us who've spent years chasing the rumors, walking those forest paths where history's breath still lingers, well, the line between myth and memory gets very thin. If you love these forgotten wartime mysteries, the stories that sit halfway between truth and legend, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now, hit that like button, and share this with the friends who can never resist a good historical riddle. Because this one is something else. Now, picture the closing months of the Second World War. It's early 1945. The Red Army is tearing through Eastern Europe like a thunderstorm. German defenses collapsing mile by mile. The Reich is crumbling from within. Hitler's promises of 1,000 years already ashes in less than 12. Yet in those final weeks, while Berlin burned and cities emptied, there was a strange, feverish activity in the mountains of Silesia. Trains loaded in the night, trucks arriving without lights, SS guards barking orders that even other soldiers didn't question. Something was being moved, something precious enough to risk everything. I've walked that ground near Warburg, or Waldenburg as the Germans called it then. The forests are dense there, the soil damp and dark, and if you didn't know better you'd think the land itself was hiding something. During the war, the Nazis turned much of Lower Silesia into a secret industrial region. They built tunnels, bunkers, entire underground cities under projects like Rees Giant. Officially, these were for weapons production, maybe even for Hitler's last redoubt. Unofficially, some were meant for storage, massive vaults for stolen art and gold stripped from occupied countries. And the loot was staggering. By 1945, the Reich had looted the treasuries of Austria, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Poland, Hungary. Everywhere they'd marched, they took gold reserves, church relics, museum paintings, private collections. Himmler had entire teams cataloging what they called cultural assets. Goering's men raided the French art world so thoroughly that entire galleries were emptied. By the time the Allies closed in, there were tons upon tons of valuables scattered across Germany and its territories, some hidden in salt mines like at Merkers, others sealed in vaults like those beneath Nuremberg or Salzburg. But Silesia, that was something different. Remote, mountainous, full of natural cover and abandoned mines. It was the perfect place to hide a treasure no one was meant to find. And so the story goes that in the last chaotic weeks of the war, as Soviet tanks rolled westward, an armored train left the city of Breslau, today's Rockwell, heading toward Waldenburg. Its purpose? To hide the Reich's last great hoard before it fell into enemy hands. Eyewitnesses are scarce, of course. The people who saw it either didn't survive the war or were too afraid to talk for decades. But every story shares a few details. The train was long, heavily guarded, its cars sealed, its destination secret. One Polish railway worker claimed he helped refuel it outside WWII, under orders from SS men who told him to look away. Another said he saw it vanish into a tunnel system that was later blown shut. And then nothing. When Soviet forces took the region in May 1945, they found half-finished bunkers, abandoned tracks, and dynamited entrances. Locals whispered about explosions in the hills at night. Some said the Germans had buried the train under tons of rock. Others believed the Soviets found it first and quietly removed everything. The Soviet archives, as usual, are silent. Over the years, countless treasure hunters have come chasing that silence. Some were serious historians, others just dreamers with shovels and old maps. I met one man in his 80s who'd been digging there since the 1960s. He'd lost two friends to a tunnel collapse in the 70s and still came back every summer. "It's here," he told me once, his hands trembling. "I can feel it under my feet." There's something contagious about that kind of conviction. The Polish authorities have always been cautious. In the communist era, even talking about Nazi loot was dangerous. It implied hidden histories that didn't fit the official line. But after 1989, when the Iron Curtain fell, the old legends came roaring back. In the mid-90s, local newspapers ran stories about villagers finding strange metal fragments, even Nazi-era tools deep in the forest. Some claimed to have seen sealed tunnels marked with wartime warning signs. And then came 2015, the year the legend exploded back into the headlines. Two men, a German and a Pole, announced that they had found the lost train using ground-penetrating radar near Warburzyk. They even filed a legal claim under Poland's treasure law, asking for a finder's fee of 10% of the value just in case it turned out to be real. The media went wild. Reporters camped in the forests, locals sold gold train t-shirts, and scientists arrived with heavy equipment. The spot was sealed off, guarded, scanned again and again. For a few weeks, it felt like history might finally give up one of its best-kept secrets. The radar images, the anomalies underground, the local legends, it all seemed to line up. Everyone wanted to believe it. Even the mayor said he was 99% sure they'd found it. But when the excavations began, the earth stayed stubbornly silent. No train, no tracks, no gold, just layers of rock and clay and disappointment. The official line was that the radar readings had been misinterpreted, that the train was a natural geological formation. The treasure hunters were marked, the story declared over. And yet, I don't know. If you walk those woods at dawn, when the mist hangs low and the birds are still, you can feel it, the weight of something unfinished. I've talked to old miners who swore there were sealed chambers beneath that hill, places even their wartime maps didn't show. One man claimed his grandfather had seen German trucks dumping crates into a tunnel there in April 1945 before it was blasted shut. Another said Soviet engineers worked the area right after the war and then vanished. So maybe the gold train wasn't a single armored convoy buried whole. Maybe it was something smaller, parts of the treasure dispersed through the tunnel networks, hidden room by room. That would explain the scattered finds, occasional Nazi artifacts, bits of railway equipment, fragments of documents. What we do know for sure is that the Nazis hid enormous amounts of loot in Silesia. The Reese complex itself, those vast underground halls carved into the Ural Mountains, was real. Hundreds of forced laborers died building it. The question is, what was stored there? Some historians believe it was meant to be a command headquarters or even a site for secret weapons research. Others, like Polish investigator Joanna Lamparska, think parts of it were repurposed for storing valuables. The truth is, both could be right. During those final chaotic weeks, Hitler's men were desperate. They moved gold reserves from Berlin, from Breslau, from Königsberg, anywhere that might fall to the enemy. Trucks left at night, records burned, witnesses silenced. To hide a train was extreme, but not impossible. They had the manpower, the explosives, and above all, the motive. And think about it, hundreds of tons of gold from occupied Europe, thousands of priceless artworks, jewelry, stolen bank reserves. The Reich's financial heart was collapsing, and somewhere, someone was trying to save what was left for a future that never came. Could that future have been the mythical Fourth Reich? Maybe. The SS had contingency plans, escape routes through Austria, caches of money and documents hidden in mountain monasteries. Project Action Fueland, Some called it a network to smuggle out assets and personnel to South America. The gold could have funded it. But if the train existed, who knew its route? Only a handful of SS officers. Some were captured, some killed, most vanished. No manifest, no coordinates, no orders survived. It's like the earth swallowed it whole. Still, the myth refuses to die. Maybe that's because it represents something larger, the idea that not everything from that dark time was uncovered. That beneath all the archives and museums, there are still secrets rusting quietly in the dark. And maybe, if you're like me, you find that haunting. The thought that a piece of history is still out there, buried in silence, waiting. You know what? Let's pause for a second. If you're still with me on this journey through forgotten tunnels and half-buried truths, take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. Drop a comment below. Do you think the Nazi gold train ever existed? Or was it just one of those post-war legends that grew from fear and rumor? Hit the like button if you enjoy stories like this. It really helps keep this channel digging through the past. Because we're only just getting started. Yes, let's pick up right where we left off. The air inside that Polish forest is still heavy with the whispers of 1945. You can almost hear the echo of distant explosions, fading thunder of artillery, as the Red Army stormed across Silesia. But the real storm, the one history still argues about, was buried deep beneath those wooded hills, hidden behind layers of rock, rumor, and fear. The Soviets reached the area first, and when they did, the Germans were gone, vanished. What remained were burned-out trucks, bomb craters, and frightened locals who spoke of night convoys rolling through the darkness. Old women swore they'd seen men in SS uniforms herding Polish laborers toward sealed tunnels. One farmer, who lived near the line that connected Breslau, modern-day Rockall, to Waldenburg, said he saw a long, armored train parked on the tracks just before dawn. He never saw it again. The next morning, dynamite charges thundered from the mountains, and the tunnel mouth collapsed. The Soviets, being who they were, immediately began their own search. They had their own treasure hunters, NKVD officers, engineers, even geologists probing the mountains with crude tools and interrogation cells. But here's the curious thing. Whatever they found, they didn't talk about it. Soviet archives from 1945 to 1950 show large movements of strategic materials from Lower Silesia to Moscow. Some historians think that might have been uranium or looted art, maybe even the Reichsbank's emergency gold reserves. Others insist the Soviets staged the entire thing, spreading rumors of a gold train to justify their looting. And, let's be honest, they did loot everything: church bells, museum paintings, even hospital beds. Still, you can't ignore how many German documents mention those very same railway tunnels near Warburg. There's evidence of an operation codenamed Ries, meaning giant or vast underground construction network ordered by Hitler himself. The complex spanned the Ural Mountains, full of unfinished tunnels, bunkers, and chambers carved out of the rock. Slave labor from nearby camps worked day and night, until early 1945, when the SS abruptly abandoned the project. Some say it was meant to be a secret headquarters for the Führer. Others think it was an underground armament factory. But locals at the time whispered something far darker: that a hidden section of the tunnels was sealed with concrete, and behind it lay trains loaded with Reich gold, private art collections, and crates marked with the black eagle of the WWII. Now, this is where history turns murky, like an old photograph left out in the rain. After the war, Poland was under Soviet occupation, and exploring those tunnels was forbidden. Anyone who tried was arrested, sometimes disappeared. The communist regime had no interest in tales that could inspire Western journalists to poke on. For 40 years, the gold train story was a local legend. You'd hear it in smoky taverns, passed from miners to their sons, told by men who swore they'd seen the SS guarding the rails. But no one could prove a thing. Then the Cold War ended, and the archives began to crack open. It was the early 1990s when treasure hunters returned to the mountains with metal detectors and dynamite, hoping to find what Stalin might have missed. The first serious expedition was led by a Polish officer turned historian named Tadeusz Słowik. He'd collected testimonies from surviving German railway workers, one of whom drew a crude map showing a train disappearing near the 65th kilometer mark between Rockwar and Wartime. Słowik's team dug, drilled, and scanned, but they found nothing except old timber supports and a few rusted shell casings. The disappointment was brutal. The newspapers mocked them, calling it Poland's fool's gold. But the legend wouldn't die. It slept for another 2 decades until 2015, when the world suddenly rediscovered the Nazi gold train. That year, 2 men, Piotr Koper, a Polish construction worker, and Andreas Richter, a German treasure hunter, walked into a government office in Wartime claiming they'd found it. They said they'd used ground-penetrating radar, and the scan showed something long and metallic, buried about 70 meters deep, right under an old railway embankment near Księżyc Castle. They even told the local authorities, very politely, that under Polish law they were entitled to a finder's reward of 10% of the treasure's value. Imagine that confidence. When word got out, the story exploded like artillery fire across the world. CNN, BBC, Der Spiegel, they all rushed to Wartime. Journalists camped on the hillsides, drones buzzed overhead, and treasure hunters from as far as America and Japan showed up with shovels. I remember watching those scenes and thinking, my God, it's as if the ghosts of 1945 had come back to watch the circus. The Polish military fenced off the site. The government issued statements urging caution. But behind the scenes, geologists from Krakow quietly ran new scans. What they found only deepened the mystery: shapes that looked unmistakably like train cars, long, rectangular cavities exactly where Koper and Richter had claimed. Excitement reached fever pitch. The Polish Deputy Minister of Culture even announced that there is a 99% probability that the train exists. For weeks, the world held its breath. People speculated about what was inside: gold bars, paintings stolen from the Louvre, even the fabled amber room taken from Tsarskoye Selo in 1941. Others warned it might contain something more dangerous: chemical weapons, unexploded ordnance, or even the skeletal remains of forced laborers sealed in forever. The local hotels filled with tourists and adventurers, souvenir shops sold gold train t-shirts, and a quiet mining town suddenly became the epicenter of global curiosity. Then came the dig. In August 2016, under the blistering Polish sun, excavation crews rolled in with backhoes, drills, and cameras. Koper and Richter, wearing bright orange vests, stood at the edge of the pit while reporters pressed their microphones forward. Day after day, they dug deeper. And what did they find? Clay, stone, more clay. No gold, no train, no glittering Nazi fortune, just the bones of old Earth and the hollow echo of hope. The media called it the Great Disappointment, but Koper didn't give up. He insisted they were digging in the wrong spot, that the radar signal had been misinterpreted, that somewhere nearby, just a few meters off, the real tunnel still lay sealed. What fascinates me most is that even after that failure, locals continued to whisper that the train was there, just buried deeper than anyone dared to reach. And, truth be told, they might not be wrong. When you study wartime German engineering, especially projects like WWII, you realize how sophisticated their underground constructions were. They could dig vast chambers that remain dry and hidden even today. Soviet engineers in the 1940s noted entire tunnel systems they couldn't fully map because of collapses and booby traps. If the train exists, it may well be locked behind hundreds of tons of rock or encased in concrete that modern scanners can't penetrate. There's also a darker angle. Documents recovered from the SS archives hint that the Reich did indeed prepare an armored train in 1945 loaded with valuables from Breslau banks and private collections. The order came directly from Gauleiter Karl Hanke, one of Hitler's most loyal regional leaders. The purpose was clear: to move the wealth westward, away from the advancing Soviets. The train, according to some accounts, left Breslau in early May 1945, just days before Germany surrendered, and never reached its destination. Witnesses said it was last seen near Waldenburg, exactly where the modern legend places it. If true, then what happened next? One theory is that the SS deliberately buried the train, sealing it with explosives to prevent capture. Another suggests that Soviet troops found it first and secretly transported the contents to Moscow, covering up the operation to keep the spoils for themselves. There's also the tantalizing idea that the train wasn't carrying gold at all but sensitive documents, Nazi research, diplomatic archives, perhaps even files from the SS's occult divisions that Himmler guarded so obsessively. Whatever the case, something vanished in those final chaotic days, and the earth swallowed it whole. Now, before we press deeper into what those tunnels might still be hiding and how modern technology keeps reviving this story, I'd love for you to take a second. If you're enjoying this dive into one of history's most enduring mysteries, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. It really helps keep these stories alive. Hit that like button if you love untold WWII tales, and drop a comment telling me whether you think the gold train is real or just a legend that refuses to die. Alright, let's keep going. When I first walked near the ruins of the Ries complex years ago, the silence struck me. These mountains hold secrets. The tunnels themselves, those that are open to the public, are damp, echoing, and smell faintly of rust and oil. You can still see the marks where drills bit into the rock, the grooves where railway tracks once lay. Guides will tell you about forced laborers from Gross-Rosen concentration camp who dug until their bodies gave out. Thousands died in those mountains, buried in unmarked graves. It's sobering to think that whatever treasures the Nazis hid might be lying on top of the bones of the people they enslaved. Archaeologists have found traces of rails leading into blocked shafts, ventilation pipes that go nowhere, and reinforced concrete walls that don't match any known blueprints. And it's not just the gold train legend that haunts this region. Over the years, strange finds have surfaced: crates filled with rare porcelain, broken Luftwaffe instruments, fragments of paintings with German inventory codes. In 2018, a small cache of pre-war Polish coins was found near an abandoned tunnel, wrapped in oilcloth and still shiny. Each new discovery fans the embers of belief. But the problem with legends like this is they attract more dreamers than historians. Since 2015, dozens of amateur explorers have flooded the area with metal detectors and shovels, digging illegally. The Polish government had to pass new laws banning private excavations. Even so, night after night, people sneak into the woods with flashlights, convinced they're about to make the discovery of the century. I can't say I blame them. There's something intoxicating about the thought of uncovering a piece of history so massive it could rewrite what we know about the war's end. We'll get into what modern science and satellite imagery have revealed. Next, the radar anomalies, the drones, and how the Earth still holds tight to its secrets. But for now, imagine that train, its engines dead, its carriages full of treasure or truth, entombed beneath the mountains of Silesia while the world above moved on. The Nazis are long gone, but their shadows linger in steel and stone, and in the restless dreams of those still searching for what they left behind. All right, then let's slip back into the tunnels, right where we left off. It's late afternoon in the All Mountains. The air smells of pine and damp stone. If you listen carefully, you can still hear the faint hum of a train from 70 years ago, or maybe that's just the wind whistling through half-collapsed shafts. Either way, this is where science and superstition collide. Because in the years following that 2015 frenzy, researchers didn't give up. They brought in new tools, advanced ground-penetrating radar, magnetometers, even satellite-based imaging that could detect density variations deep underground. And what they found was frustratingly inconclusive. The scans showed anomalies, metallic shapes, voids, even what looked like parallel lines consistent with railway tracks, but nothing that could be proven as a train. The Polish Academy of Sciences released a carefully worded statement. There is no train at the site indicated. But when you read between the lines, their own data suggested something man-made was buried there. The public read no gold, but the experts knew the ground was whispering. Now, let me tell you a story that doesn't often make it into the newspapers. Around 2017, a local miner named Marek, who worked on a municipal project near the same railway line, claimed his excavator broke through what felt like hollow space beneath the soil. He said he heard a faint echo beneath rock. He reported it, of course, but the area was sealed off within hours by local authorities, citing safety concerns. No follow-up, no report. It vanished into bureaucracy. And that's the thing about this mystery, it's not just what's missing. It's how often the truth seems to slip through people's fingers like sand. When you talk to locals, especially the older ones who lived through the war, the details change, but one thread runs through every version: fear. They talk about German soldiers guarding the line, about people who went into the tunnels and never came out, about strange lights at night in the spring of 1945. Some remember trucks filled with crates, covered in tarps, moving toward the mountain road at dawn. I once met an elderly woman in Warbezik who said her father helped transport barrels to the railway yard. He never told her what was inside, but years later, on his deathbed, he muttered that the gold was cursed. Whether he meant that literally or metaphorically, I'll never know, but his daughter's eyes still carried that mix of pride and unease. You see, what most people forget is that by 1945, the Nazis were desperate. They'd lost Berlin, their armies were crumbling, and everyone from SS officers to minor bureaucrats was trying to save something: money, art, even just their own skins. Massive convoys of trucks and trains were used to move valuables out of Germany's eastern territories before the Soviets could grab them. Most were destroyed or captured, but some, according to declassified Allied reports, disappeared without trace. One such document from the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, precursor to the CIA, mentions a special train from Breslau carrying Reichsbank property, last seen heading southwest. The description matches the gold train legend almost perfectly. There's another angle though, one that rarely gets discussed because it complicates the romance of buried treasure. What if the train didn't vanish underground by accident, but by design? There's evidence that certain SS engineers were tasked with sealing infrastructure during retreat bridges, tunnels, even entire rail lines. The idea was to deny access to advancing armies. They'd fill tunnels with explosives, set the charges, and disappear. But some of these engineering demolitions were overdone, collapsing entire sections of hillside. If the train entered one of those tunnels before detonation, it might still be inside, trapped behind rubble, intact but unreachable. Historians from Rockwell University have mapped over a dozen sealed tunnels in the region that have never been excavated because they're too dangerous. Some are beneath modern roads, others under private land. When I visited a few of them years ago, what struck me wasn't how old they looked, it was how deliberate the ceiling was. Perfect concrete plugs, thick as a fortress wall. The Germans didn't do things halfway. If they wanted something hidden, they made sure it stayed hidden. Now, I've got to tell you, the Amber Room theory, while sensational, might not be as far-fetched as people think. For those who don't know, the Amber Room was a chamber of gilded amber panels, mirrors, and gold leaf, a masterpiece of 18th century art given by Prussia to Russia. The Nazis looted it in 1941, packed it into crates, and shipped it to Königsberg. It disappeared in 1945. Soviet search teams scoured the ruins for years. Some say it was destroyed by bombing, others that it was moved by rail toward the west, possibly on the same route as the gold train. Documents from 1944 show a train carrying cultural materials leaving Königsberg for Silesia. Was that the Amber Room? No one knows, but it adds one more tantalizing piece to the puzzle. Meanwhile, modern Poland has turned this legend into a kind of folklore meets economy. Wartburg hosts tours, festivals, even an annual Gold Train Week. And while skeptics scoff, there's something profoundly human about it. We crave mystery. We want to believe that history still hides secrets we can touch. The gold train isn't just about gold, it's about closure, justice, the dream that maybe, just maybe, something beautiful or terrible or both is still waiting to be found. But here's what fascinates me most: the people who chase it. Men and women who spend their lives and fortunes digging through mud, poring over yellowed maps, arguing in smoky bars about GPS coordinates and Nazi codes. Some are scientists, others are pure romantics, and every one of them says the same thing: the mountain calls to them. One man told me it's like the land itself hums at night, whispering to anyone who listens long enough. Let's step back for a moment though. Think about the sheer logistics involved if such a train existed. An armored locomotive, several carriages, gold, weapons, art, hundreds of tons of material. Moving that in the middle of a collapsing front would have been madness. Yet the Nazis were nothing if not methodical. They documented everything. And while many of those records were destroyed in the last weeks of the war, fragments survive. In 2019, a Polish historian named Tomasz Jurek uncovered an SS report mentioning transport of valuables to secured underground location near Riez. The date: April 28, 1945, barely a week before Hitler's death. So, we have physical anomalies, we have eyewitness accounts, and now we have written orders, but still no train. Why? Maybe because the Soviets found it first. There's a little-known episode from 1946. Soviet engineering battalions sealed off a section of track near Wartburg for demining operations. Locals were barred from the area for weeks. When they returned, the tracks had been dismantled and the land leveled. Soviet trucks were seen leaving at night. There are even photographs of rail wagons loaded with crates covered by tarps, heading east. None of this is definitive proof, of course, but if you've studied how the Red Army handled captured treasures, it fits the pattern perfectly. And yet, something doesn't add up. If the Soviets recovered the train, why keep it secret? They were never shy about boasting when they took enemy spoils. Unless, of course, what they found wasn't gold at all. Some suggest the train might have carried sensitive Nazi research files from weapons programs or intelligence archives implicating Soviet collaborators. In that case, silence would have been the logical choice. It's also possible the train contained looted valuables from neutral countries or private families, connected to high-ranking Nazis. Publicly acknowledging such cargo could have caused diplomatic chaos during post-war settlements. I'll tell you what I think. Somewhere in that region lies the physical trace of the legend rails, wreckage, maybe even sealed compartments, but whatever gold or art was once there is long gone. Taken by the Soviets, hidden in archives, melted down, or quietly sold through black markets over decades. But the idea of the train remains, buried deeper than any treasure. It's what keeps people searching, the hope that history hasn't yet closed all its doors. Asterisk. Still, technology keeps improving. In the last few years, teams have used drone-based magnetometry and deep penetration LiDAR scans that can map subterranean voids in high resolution. And wouldn't you know it, in 2021, researchers detected a new anomaly under the same ridge where Koper and Richter once dug. It's large, metallic, and rectangular, about the size of a train carriage. Polish authorities haven't authorized excavation yet, citing environmental regulations. Maybe they're being cautious, or maybe they know something we don't. Either way, the legend endures. Every few years it surfaces, grabs the world's attention, and then sinks back into the shadows of the mountains. And maybe that's fitting. Some stories aren't meant to be solved, they're meant to be remembered. Now, if you've been enjoying this journey so far, if the blend of mystery, war, and buried history keeps your imagination racing like mine, go ahead, subscribe to the channel. It's free, it helps a ton, and it lets us keep chasing these incredible true stories. Hit like, share this with a friend who loves a good mystery, and drop a comment. What do you think? Did the Nazis really hide their gold train beneath the mountains of Poland? Or is it a ghost story born from the ashes of war? Alright, stretch your legs, refill your cup, because in the next part, we'll dive even deeper into the tunnels themselves, the eyewitness accounts that contradict official history, and the secrets hidden within Hitler's last engineering obsession. Let's go back to those tunnels, the ones carved by the WWII project, hidden beneath the Ural Mountains of Lower Silesia. When you first descend into one of them, the air hits you differently. It's cold, metallic, like the breath of the earth itself. The walls glisten with mineral sweat, and your voice bounces back at you in a dozen ghostly echoes. I've been down there twice, once with an official tour, once unofficially, after dark, when the place feels less like a ruin and more like a confession booth for the dead. You can't help but imagine the men who built it, starved laborers from Gross Rosen, dragging rebar and dynamite through the dark, while the SS barked orders above them. Thousands died down there, their names never recorded, their bones mixed with the cement that holds those tunnels up. So when people talk about hidden gold, I can't help but think whatever's buried there, the real treasure's already been paid for in blood. The WWII complex was massive, possibly the largest construction project of the Third Reich that never reached completion. It stretched across several sites: Ashoka, Wardars, Jugowas, and Soborn. Each site was connected by railway spurs, reinforced concrete corridors, and vast caverns big enough to house tanks or trains. Engineers estimated that only a fraction of the tunnels were ever mapped before the war ended. Some chambers remained sealed, flooded, or completely lost beneath landslides. What's strange is how organized it all was. There were power cables, ventilation shafts, even narrow-gauge tracks running deep into the mountain. That level of precision doesn't match the chaotic final months of the war. It suggests planning, long-term purpose, and secrecy on a scale that makes you wonder, what were they really building down there? The official line says WWII was meant to be a new Führer headquarters, a replacement for the bombed-out Wolf's Lair. But the scale seems wrong for that. It's too industrial, too vast. Some historians think it was part of an underground armament network, meant to continue weapons production after Germany's surface factories were destroyed. Others think it had a darker goal: research and storage of advanced technology, or even prototypes of weapons the Allies never knew existed. And then there's the more controversial theory, whispered in the margins of declassified SS documents, that Rees was designed not just for military use, but as a vault, a final sanctuary for the Reich's most valuable possessions. If you were an SS officer in 1945, facing defeat, you had two choices: burn everything, or hide it where no one could find it. And Hitler's circle was obsessed with the idea of resurrection of the Reich rising again from the ashes. What better insurance policy than a hidden cache of gold, art, and blueprints for rebuilding? That's the legend's seductive logic. It's not just about greed, it's about survival. About a future the Nazis thought they could still engineer beneath the earth while their cities burned above it. Now, there's one name that keeps appearing in connection with Rees and the Gold Train: SS General Jacob Sporenberg. He was the senior SS and police leader in Silesia during those final months. After the war, the Allies captured him, and during his interrogation, Sporenberg allegedly spoke of sealed transports hidden in the mountains. The documents from that interrogation vanished into Soviet custody, but fragments surfaced decades later. One Polish researcher claimed to have read a transcript mentioning an armored transport train loaded with Reichsbank property sealed near Waldenburg. The authenticity is debated. Of course it always is, but the consistency with eyewitness accounts is eerie. And then there's the role of the miners. The Germans used local miners to prepare the tunnel systems, sometimes under direct SS supervision. After the war, some of those men were still alive, though terrified to talk. One of them, an old miner named Antoni, told a story in the 1980s that still gives me chills. He said he and his crew were ordered to wall off a tunnel entrance late in the war. Behind them, he heard machinery engines, metallic clanging, and voices giving orders in German. Then the sound of explosives. They sealed it, poured concrete, and were told never to return. Antoni said he never forgot the smell of oil and smoke. He believed, to his dying day, that a train had been buried alive behind that wall. Years later, in the early 2000s, a group of explorers tried to find that tunnel. They found collapsed sections, concrete barriers too thick to break through, and one curious thing, a section of steel rail embedded in rock, leading straight into a sealed wall. When they tried to cut into it, they were stopped by police. The official reason: safety concerns. You start to see a pattern every time someone gets close. Someone else intervenes. I've talked to geologists who've analyzed the soil there, and they'll tell you, in their cautious academic way, that something is definitely under that hillside. Not necessarily a train, but cavities, metallic densities, anomalies that don't fit natural formations. Could be old mining tunnels, could be steel debris, could be a train that's been sitting there since the spring of '45. The trouble is, digging's dangerous. Those tunnels were rigged with explosives, some of which might still be live. There are stories of explorers triggering small collapses, of gas buildups, of entire sections that breathe like lungs when the wind shifts. Let's talk about Xie's castle for a moment, the jewel on the mountain. The castle looms above the forest like something out of a Gothic novel, but during the war, it was no fairy tale. The Nazis took it over in 1944, evicted its owners, and began heavy reconstruction under SS supervision. They dug deep beneath it tunnels, bunkers, hidden elevators. The castle was to serve as a communications hub and possibly even a headquarters for Hitler or Himmler. Beneath those marble halls, prisoners worked in darkness. Some of the tunnels were later flooded by the retreating Germans, others filled with rubble. And it's no coincidence that the supposed location of the gold train lies just kilometers away. Many believe the tunnel network beneath the castle connects directly to the sealed rail lines below. When you stand inside one of those tunnels, it's hard not to feel something ancient, older than war, older than man. The dripping water echoes like a clock. The air hums with static, and then you remember this was built by hands that are long gone, under orders that came from men who thought they could command eternity. There's poetry in that, grim as it is. Now, skeptics love to say the gold train story's been debunked. They point to failed excavations, scientific studies, and the lack of physical evidence. And yes, that's true, no one's found the train. But legends survive because they're rooted in something real. The question isn't whether the train exists. It's what gave birth to the belief. People don't conjure these things out of thin air. There were real trains, real gold, real disappearances. Somewhere along the line, one of those transports went off the record. And the deeper you dig, literally or metaphorically, the more you realize this mystery isn't just about treasure. It's about memory. The memory of a world turned upside down. The memory of ordinary people who saw extraordinary things and weren't believed. The memory of a war that left shadows so long they still stretch into our century. When I think of the men who go down there now, scientists, historians, dreamers, I don't see them as treasure hunters. I see them as archaeologists of truth. They're not just looking for gold. They're looking for closure, for a tangible link to the madness that once gripped Europe. Because maybe, if they can unearth one last piece of that world, they can understand how it happened, and how to make sure it never does again. And I'll tell you something, even if they never find the train, the search itself is valuable. Every shovel of earth brings up history, buttons, bullets, tools, bits of uniforms. Each fragment tells a story about the people who lived, worked, and died there. It's a kind of resurrection, quiet but profound. But I also understand the caution. Governments have their reasons. National pride, security, liability, call it what you will. Sometimes, not knowing is safer. Because once you open the earth, you don't just find treasure, you find ghosts. And I mean that almost literally. During one exploration near Wardars in 2019, ground-penetrating radar picked up shapes that weren't metal, but organic bones, scattered across what might have been a collapsed chamber. Archaeologists stepped in and confirmed they were human, likely laborers, entombed when a section gave way in 1945. For a week, the site turned into a memorial. Candles, flowers, silence. Then, just as quickly, it was sealed again. Out of respect, they said. Or maybe out of fear that the past would start speaking too loudly. Before we move toward the final stretch of this story, before we talk about modern treasure hunters, satellite revelations, and what might really lie buried beneath those mountains, pause for a moment. Take a breath. And if you're still with me, still drawn into this living mystery of history and human obsession, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Like the video, share it with a friend who loves digging through the hidden corners of World War II, and tell me in the comments if you could explore one of those tunnels yourself. Would you? Alright, let's go deeper. The light's dimming, the air's getting thin, and the truth, whatever it is, lies just ahead. Behind a wall of stone and 70 years of silence. Alright, let's step back into the story one last time. The air of mystery still lingers on that old Polish hillside, where steel rails once vanished into the dark. Decades have passed, the wars have long ended, and yet, whispers of the Nazi gold train still drift like mist through the pines. I've walked through those forests myself, boots crunching over dry leaves, eyes scanning the moss-covered entrances of tunnels that haven't seen daylight since 1945. And in moments like that, you can almost hear it, the faint hum of diesel engines, the clang of metal against rock, the desperate voices of men trying to hide something far bigger than themselves. That's the weight of history pressing through the soil, and it never really fades. When the guns fell silent and Hitler's empire crumbled, Europe was a shattered puzzle. Gold reserves, artwork, jewels, entire archives of stolen culture gone. vanished. The Allies found some of it in salt mines and vaults, but so much more was simply lost, swallowed by time and secrecy. Poland became one of those places where history refused to give up its ghosts. Trains loaded with plunder rolled east and west in those final weeks, as Nazi officers tried to hide evidence of their crimes and secure their own escape routes. The gold train was said to be one of them, a long armored convoy filled with stolen treasure, hidden deep in the Ural Mountains before the Red Army arrived. Now, stories like this tend to split people. Some laugh it off as folklore, a campfire tale for treasure hunters. But I've seen enough war archives to know this much: there was chaos in those final months, and chaos has a way of burying truth. In 1945, documents captured by Soviet intelligence spoke of trains reassigned for Reich valuables, heading toward Lower Silesia. Some of those trains never reached their recorded destinations. Entire convoys were wiped from manifests, and officers responsible for them either disappeared or turned up dead. If that doesn't make your hair stand on end, it should. There's a peculiar thing about mysteries like this. The deeper you dig, the more you realize how fragile the truth becomes. After the war, the Soviets took control of the region around Wartime, and anything resembling German infrastructure was either sealed off or dismantled. The mountains were mined, tunnels flooded, entrances blown apart. Officially, it was about safety: unexploded ordnance, collapsing shafts, all that. But locals whispered something else. They said the Soviets had found something, that they'd extracted train cars under armed guard and shipped them east. Yet no record of such an operation ever surfaced in Moscow's declassified archives. At least, none that I've ever seen, and I've looked at. By the 1960s and 70s, Poland had grown quieter, more guarded. But every few years, someone would stumble across a rumor, an old map, a half-buried rail line, a forgotten journal from a German officer stationed in Silesia. And every time, the legend would spark again. I've met a few of those seekers, men with weathered hands, eyes burning with obsession. They talk about ground-penetrating radar, about signs of hollow chambers beneath the earth, about anomalies that couldn't be explained. Some even claim to have unearthed crates, rusted weapons, and twisted tracks, but never gold, never proof. Maybe that's why the story endures, because we want to believe that some part of history still lies out there, untouched. We want to imagine that beneath those forests, there's a train frozen in time, its steel doors sealed against the dust of decades, its cargo gleaming in the dark like a monument to human greed. And yet, there's something sobering about that thought too, because if such a treasure does exist, it was born from suffering the spoils of stolen lives, torn from homes and museums and temples across a dying continent. It's strange how history echoes. In 2015, the gold train exploded back into headlines when two explorers, Pieter Koper and Andreas Richter, claimed they'd found it. They said radar scans showed a 100-meter-long anomaly buried near the old line between Wartime and Rockwall. Polish authorities descended on the site. Reporters camped for days. You could feel the excitement, like lightning in the air. I remember watching the footage, excavators clawing into the earth, men wiping sweat from their brows, the world holding its breath. And then nothing. No gold, no train, just sand and stone. But was it really nothing? Or did someone quietly close the book again? Some say the Polish government handled it too quickly, as if they wanted to put an end to the frenzy before it got out of control. Others think it was a deliberate distraction, a bit of theater to keep deeper operations in the shadows. Either way, that event proved one thing: the legend still holds incredible power. It's a story that refuses to die, just like the war it came from. I've had old miners tell me they heard strange noises underground, even decades later. Engines, one said, tapping his ear with a shaking hand, engines running in the dark, and maybe he was imagining things. But sometimes, when you stand near those sealed tunnels, you feel a vibration in the air, a deep, humming pulse like the earth itself is remembering. Could it be machinery still buried down there, rusting away slowly? Or maybe it's just the heartbeat of history, reminding us how much we still don't know. And if you've made it this far with me, then you're the kind of person who gets it, the kind who knows that history isn't just dates and battles, but mysteries that keep us awake at night. So before we dig even deeper, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe the Nazi gold train was real? Or do you think it was a smokescreen, a myth born from desperation and confusion? Let me know in the comments, and if this story has pulled you in, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and share it with someone who loves unraveling the past. Because the more we talk about these stories, the more alive they stay. Now, as the decades rolled on, treasure hunters from across the world kept returning to Poland. Some came with state-of-the-art equipment, others with nothing but shovels and hope. Every few years, new leads surfaced, where marked officers' diaries, intercepted radio logs, even testimonies from locals who swore they saw trains entering tunnels that were later sealed. It became more than a search for gold. It became a chase for truth, and maybe a little redemption. After all, uncovering that train wouldn't just mean wealth, it would mean understanding one of history's great and finished chapters. Yet there's another layer to all of this that people rarely talk about. During those final days of the Reich, Himmler's men were obsessed with moving not just treasure, but documents, records of war crimes, lists of collaborators, coded archives of secret operations. If a train like that did vanish, maybe it wasn't just carrying gold and jewels. Maybe it held information that certain people, even after the war, didn't want found. And that idea, that's the one that keeps historians awake at night. Because if the train was destroyed, it would have been to erase more than evidence of theft. It would have been to erase the very paper trail of evil.